Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Now, it's time to move on to our next lesson. At this point, we start to talk a little bit about physiological differences among men and women, and I want to bring back a couple names that you want to remember in the study of human sexuality. In the field of psychology overall, there's a couple names that stand out. There's a lot of names that stand out, but if you take it to the subsections or the subfields within psychology, there's always a couple names that stand out. Say in social psychology, there's a couple names that stands out. In human growth, there's a couple of names that stand out. In statistics, there's a couple names that stand out, and so on. So when it comes to the field of sexuality, there's a couple names that stand out. And these individuals were actually medically trained, and they were not into the behavioral or thought side of psychology, but the names stand out because of a very famous study. This is Virginia Johnson and William Masters. Masters and Johnson created the most famous study in the history of human sexuality. What made this study so interesting, fascinating, unique, was the fact that the setup of the study, the setup of the experiment, what they were interested in is to understand how the body physiologically reacts to sexual stimulation. And imagine as a participant coming into a laboratory filled with people with white coats, with cameras, with equipment that would be hooked up to you. Then there would be a table in front, and they'd be like, okay, please, if you don't mind, have some type of sexual stimulation in front of us. It's kind of an odd thing to think about. They were very interested in understanding how the body responds physiologically, and there was no study in humanity up to that point that could explain how does even our blood flow when we have sexual intercourse. The study that they made took a couple years actually to develop properly. They created their own instruments like the vaginal photoplethysmograph or the penile strain gauge, and the equipment was meant to study how your body reacted physiologically. And the study was so well constructed that eventually it became a book, because it was such a lengthy study that there was no real journal that could publish that much information. Plus the study was somewhat frowned upon because it was based entirely on sexuality. So they ended up publishing that study as a book, which is very unusual for a study to end up becoming a book. And not only that, but the book even became a bestseller. So Masters and Johnson became quite famous for that study, which is still considered relevant today, even though it happened decades ago. And it's very simple. The question is, how does our body respond physiologically to stimulation? So let's summarize it. The thing is, this is called the human sexual response cycle. And overall, Masters and Johnson noted that there's 4 steps into how the body responds to stimulation. So let's think of a graph that you see here, and let's try to explain this. Overall, from a perspective of your body on a calm, relaxed state, our body tends to remain somewhat stable like that. If you breathe, if you hear your heartbeat, if you breathe, you may not be sweating at the moment, you may not have any anxiety as you watch this video, so everything is cool, everything is relaxed. This is how you are. This is how you are. What happens when your body starts to get sexually stimulated? So, first thing that they notice is excitation. The first stage, and they coined the term called vasocongestion. Vasocongestion is the swelling of the genital tissue that eventually prepare the body for sexual intercourse. One of the things noted is physiologically, our bodies are created from the same cells. And as you'll see a little bit later on, if it's not because nature gives us an extra gene, by nature, everybody's made to be a female. Now, quick interesting thing about this, from a religious perspective, in my case I'm Catholic, I was raised Catholic, and if you go to the Bible and Christianity, they talk about how males came first, and then women came after from the body of a male. But it's very interesting that from an evolutionary standpoint, it's actually the opposite. Women came first. And if you want to think of what is the body of a human like in a neutral setting, it's actually the body of a woman. So the extra gene that males have is what triggers male genitalia. But if it wasn't for that gene, actually we would look exactly the same. So it's the same cells, creating different types of yinos. But the reactions seem to be somewhat normal. So the same tissues reacting to sexual stimulation lead to the entire body bumping, preparing physiologically for what's coming. It's like, it's like when you're about to get into a workout. Well, technically, sexual intercourse is a workout, but it's, it's like when you prepare, when you start to warm up. So your heart starts to bump a little faster. Your breath becomes a little bit faster as well. Your body starts to feel this adrenaline going. And there's, spots in the skin, depending on how sensitive your skin may be, but you may have kind of like dark or reddish spots around your chest. I was about to say pecho. I was about to talk in Spanish. In your cheeks, you name it. And you can even feel our skin gets warm. So excitation is reflected by a build-up physiologically going like that. Interesting couple things to note here. Masters and Janssen noted excitation for males tend to be far faster. So for a male, depending on the age, but it's not unusual for a male to go through that stage even in a minute. If it's, thinking of a 16-year-old, boom, just like that goes up. If you think of an older man, say someone in their 60s, this process may take far longer. And there may have to be the help of a blue pill or so on. But interestingly for women, however, while the stage of excitation is quite fast on men, on women it tends to be actually much slower. So it's not going up like that, but it builds like that. If you want to take it on a kind of an average, well, for men it can take about 3 minutes. For women it may take like 7 minutes. The reality is that the body of a woman takes a little bit more time to adjust to that excitement stage. What is the result of this vasocongestion is the swelling of the genital tissue, which leads males to have an erection and leads women to vaginal lubrication. Technically speaking, it's the same cells reacting in the same way, but leading to different results, different outcomes, because our genitals are built differently. So while a male gets an erection, a female gets vaginal lubrication. The time differs for how long it takes, but then you reach the second stage, which is the plateau stage. When you reach the plateau is when everything remains up and kind of constant. So there is no difference among men and women for this one. It remains constant like that. The plateau stage. When you're in the plateau stage, Masters and Johnson coined another term called myotonia, or myotonia. I'm not sure about the pronunciation of it. So myotonia is a muscular contraction. So around your body you start to contract like that. Those spasms that you get through their bodies, for the most part, tend to be, perceived as positive. Those tend to be fulfilling, welcome sensations. It's kind of interesting because our facial expressions change and we don't know it. We have like our face of pleasure and we're not aware of this. The same face that you make at that point, if you make that face in any other point, it looks hilarious. But at that point, if you're in the moment, you enjoy seeing your partner grimacing like that. After that, everything in the body kind of tightens up a little bit. And that's also part of the contractions that you have through the spasm going like that, boom, 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 boom. So if stimulation is ongoing, eventually those contractions are going to lead to a buildup in tension that will need a relaxation period. And when the relaxation period goes like that, all the muscles through the body start to relax. And that's a very welcome, very pleasurable sensation of an orgasm. So there's no difference among men and women. At that point, you reach the top. Physiologically, when you reach your top, and then it kind of decreases. The orgasm, by Masters and Johnson's accounts, wouldn't last more than less than a minute. Let's put it like that. It lasts seconds. Those seconds are followed by the release of that tension, and depending on how exciting the moment is, but it's a very subjective experience. How turned on may you be at the moment, how much are you feeling attracted to your partner, you name it. There's a lot of factors that will psychologically make the sensation feel better one moment than others, some moments than others. Physiologically, your body reacts the same. Psychologically, you may experience it differently. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, your body may react one way, but your brain thinks about it in a different way. That's not a bad thing. But what distinguishes lame, kind of boring sex from really good, turn on, fantastic sex is not really the body, but it's the mind. You may feel exactly the same physiologically, but the way that your mind perceives the moment is what makes such a big distinction among one and the other. This is when we start to bring out the psychology on those studies. When you reach the orgasm, here's the most interesting finding from Masters and Johnson, at least for them. When you reach the orgasm, there's a big distinction among men and women. Because after we reach that point, man, naturally, physiologically, we tend to come down to a pre-aroused state. Masters and Johnson will call this a refractory period, when everything starts to calm down, and eventually then you have everything going down to the pre-aroused state, and this would be called the resolution. Sorry, I had to put some light because it got a little bit dark. So the resolution for men, then everything comes down. Women, however, there's a very interesting thing that follows. The body of a woman actually doesn't fall back into the resolution. The body of a female goes back to the Plateau stage. The body of a female can continue and perceive the stimulation going several times. Past the Plateau stage, if stimulation discontinues, then there's a decrease in there, which ends up being the resolution, and you go back to the pre-aroused state, because if you take it down, then the person died. So to the resolution stage. But the most interesting thing here is the body of a woman can contain the Plateau stage longer, even past the orgasm, so you can actually have something that we as males don't have. And that, my friends, is the experience of multiple orgasms. Men, women are built from the same embryonic tissue. However, women have a body part whose only function is to experience sexual stimulation, and that is the clitoris. When you read about the history of sexuality that we've done before, very often sex was perceived as a thing for males. And even though, testosterone may make us be more horny, if you like, and so on, the reality is that in comparison, the body of a woman is actually better equipped to handle sexual stimulation for a longer period of time than that of males. I mean, it's no surprise that there's so many studies that compare, for example, on average, by the moment that you begin the stimulation and you reach the orgasm and then the resolution, how long does sex actually last? Some of you may be disappointed by this if you have no clue and you thought that sex is something that was supposed to last for hours. In reality, sex lasts about 7 to 17 minutes. A series of studies, and I'll put up the references later on the slides, but a series of studies have actually shown out that the majority, in over 70% of the cases, sexual stimulation cannot really last longer than about 17 minutes. Depends a lot of a multitude of factors, such as how fit may you be, how good of a physical condition may you be, are you predisposed to have an early orgasm, and so on. A lot of different factors. But in reality, it doesn't really last that long. When you have a comparison among heterosexual couples with homosexual couples within gay males, actually sex lasts maybe a little bit less than that. And when you take it into comparison to females, so sex among homosexual women tends to last for a longer time, and it makes sense because their bodies are better equipped to make this last longer. Why would this be important at all? And I always bring this up. When it comes to relationships, even within sex, like relationships, the most common problem in relationships is communication, lack of communication. Communication that is not clear, concise, direct, well understood among couples and so on. And that same thing also transfers back to the bedroom, because in the perspective of me as a male, if I have a female partner, I may think that my partner likes the same things that I like, and my partner is going to last the same length that I last. But physiologically, our bodies may start off with a kiss, with a touch, with a sight, with a word, but the body's built differently. So, I mean, I always joke about this, but it's a reality. I mean, you're here, and you're saying, baby, I'm ready to go. But she's saying, hold on. And when she says, like, I'm here, I'm good, okay, let's do it. And you're like, no, I'm done. And then she tells you, man, you can last a little bit longer. And he's like, no, like, I can't. And she's saying, yes, I mean, you can last a little bit longer. He's like, literally, I can't. So, you know, it kind of starts to create that kind of confusion, that kind of problem. What ends up happening is you have this guy over here that is fully satisfied, but you have this sexually frustrated woman. Or on the other hand, you have this woman here that never wants to end, and you have this poor guy that is suffering to try to please her. I mean, there's so many factors here that could have been understood, and it didn't have to take us until the 1960s to understand how the body responds physiologically. And even when this information was given, it shouldn't take this long for so many people to be unaware of it. I do want to make a big emphasis now. When it comes to the point of this course is for you to be comfortable and well educated in regards to your sexuality. Very often when I talk about those things, and I'm talking about a healthy sexuality, people may have this misconception that it's about having to be sexually active, and it's not. You may not be sexually active but still feel comfortable with your sexuality. At least be aware of how it works. If you decide to remain abstinent for the rest of your life, fantastic. That's a great choice. If you decide to be sexually active in relationships, out of relationships, whatever is the case, at least have an idea for how the body reacts to that point. And to finish it up, I just want to quickly say, in this point in time, clinical psychologists that are working as sex therapists specifically may use this model to try to understand, pinpoint what a problem could be. So, for example, if you have a male with an erectile dysfunction, this is where you need to focus on the problem, but everything else is fine, so here's where we need to work on. If you have a woman that is unable to achieve an orgasm, then maybe this is a problem that we need to work on, but this and this is fine, you know? So, in the latest developments to the model, this is all Masters and Johnson, but there's a lady called Helen Singer Caplan who proposed a fifth point of the stage that was ignored. And today in clinical psychology, from a sex standpoint, it is quite fair, and that's the concept of desire. Before we take into all of this, we also need to take into account what is the desire of the person. Perhaps physically, everything is good and ready to go and ready to work, but maybe mentally you're not there and you don't want to. Mentally, you don't desire your partner. Mentally, you have no desire for sexual interaction at the moment. And as much as the body may be totally in, think of a couple that perhaps the male had a lot of issues at work, comes in frustrated, stressed out of his mind and so on, wants to sleep. The female partner wants the guy to get turned on and so on, but he's not reacting, and he sleeps, and in his sleep he has an erection, and she's saying it's because you do want it, look at it. Maybe physiologically his body is there, but his mind is not. Same for women. Hopefully this can at least give you an idea for how it works, and then there's a lot of controversies, a lot of questions that follow on this. This is the most basic part, but that is something that will be discussed on the slides, alright? Thank you guys, good work. Hopefully you like this. Let's get it going.